What lessons can we learn from a world-class athlete with regard to risk and reward and how you make financial decisions? We'll be talking about that today.
This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision-making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto.
My guest this week is Ken Reid. Ken is best known as a former member of the so-called Crazy Canucks, which was a fearless group of Canadian downhill racers who challenged European dominance in the 1970s and 1980s. He was the first Canadian to win a World Cup downhill ski race in Val d'Isère, France. He was the first non-European to win the prestigious downhill races in Kitzbühel, Austria, and in Wengen, Switzerland. Ken has done some remarkable things. He's competed in two Olympics, and it's in Innsbruck in 1976 and in Lake Placid in 1980. He's won 5 World Cup downhill races and been on the podium 14 times. He's been included into multiple halls of fame, including the Canadian Olympic Hall of Fame, the Canadian Sports Hall of Fame, the Canadian Ski Hall of Fame, the International Ski Racing Hall of Fame. It's almost exhausting. He is the co-winner of the Lou Marsh Trophy in 1978 as Canada's top male athlete. And he was named as a member of the Order of Canada in 1991. It's my distinct pleasure. Ken, welcome.
John, thank you. It's a pleasure to join you.
So most of the people I talk to on this podcast are finance people, and you're not really a finance person, although you've sort of dabbled a little bit in financial media. But your reputation comes from being a world-class skier. And I wanted to begin by talking about neither of those things. After you retired in 1983, you became a ski analyst, a columnist, a philanthropist, and in particular, you helped raise millions of dollars for cystic fibrosis research. And I'm wondering if you could perhaps tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so the connection with cystic fibrosis is through my nephew. Unfortunately, he's passed now about a decade ago. And through that family connection, it's quite direct in that cystic fibrosis being a genetic disorder. And I am, in fact, a carrier of the defective gene. But the positive is that your partner has to also have the same the defective gene. And so if one partner does and one partner doesn't, then the odds are essentially the same as the general population of your children having and inheriting cystic fibrosis. Through tremendous assistance of both, his name was Andrew and his parents, Ron, my brother, and his wife, Laura, we were able to build a series of events across Canada with the Canadian Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which is one of the best-run not-for-profit organizations in Canada. Now, the very positive thing I will add, as there's been a subsequent very positive development since we retired the Breath of Life Challenge in the mid-2000s, is that research has in fact found basically a cure for cystic fibrosis through gene editing and so on, and a lot of the genetic evaluation breakthroughs that they've achieved, which actually happened about 20 to 25 years ago, where now 90% of those afflicted by cystic fibrosis can in fact fully control it, somewhat like insulin with those with diabetes. And what it's done is it's taken the average life expectancy for cystic fibrosis, those with cystic fibrosis, got up into the high 20s. Now they don't even know what life expectancy is, because now they have a completely new lease on life and are now in fact facing all the challenges that we do in society, which is now they're getting married, they're having children, they're getting divorced, they're dealing with marital issues, they're dealing with raising children, which is a delightful problem to have, given the fact that they've been given a lease on life for 30, 40, maybe 50 more years.
I'm so glad that I was able to ask that question because it humanizes people like you. And, a lot of people put you up on a pedestal, and there's a bit of a pun intended there, but it's the sort of thing where people don't realize that, no, people like Ken will give back as well. And you're obviously a good family man. And that's actually, if I could indulge you with one more personal question, you're also the father of 3 boys, one of which your son Eric is also a world-class skier. What could you give with regard to fatherly advice and the decisions your children have to make as a result of your experiences? And how do you impart wisdom to the next generation?
Well, just a minor correction. There's 2 of them. They're actually all 3 of my boys Eric, Kevin, and Jeffrey. Those are the three in order of birth order. Two of them are on the national team or competing internationally. Kevin bowed out when he got up to the provincial team level and then pursued his education. So I would say that the advice I would impart is be very deliberate and be very cautious in terms of the kind of advice you provide. And deliberate in terms of trying to raise our children, that we with our partners want to ensure that they get the best possible opportunities, that you think it through, you work with schools, you work with advisors, you work with different people and look for their advice in terms of the whole role of parenting, which is one of the most rewarding but challenging things to do in your life. But at the same time, I think the deliberateness is, and this is the cautious side of it, is I was an elite athlete, as was my wife, Linda, and we thought it through very carefully. And we hear lots of stories of hyper aggressive parents and who are trying to support, and they're well-meaning and that they want the best for their children. But it's one of these things where if you're deliberate about it and cautious about it, you will think it through. And so in our case, because this is tailored to each individual as to how they choose to raise their children, especially going into sport. The first thing I would say is I completely support efforts of kids to get involved in programs and aim for high performance because of the life lessons it teaches you. And I see that now with my boys now into their late 20s and 30s, that they're good contributing citizens. So that's number one. Number two is, and it gives them tools to be successful in business, successful in personal life. But we chose not to get directly involved in coaching. We were supportive. We were there. It meant when you got the call to come to the airport to pick them up, you went and picked them up. You assisted where you could. That sometimes meant financially assisting and so on. But to me, the relationship between the athlete and the coach is almost a sacred bond. And you don't interfere with that. You trust the coaches they work with. You work to ensure that they have good coaches and people surrounding them, but you support them and you don't interfere. And, that's been a bit of a trial and error effort. Sometimes we have made mistakes, but interestingly enough, Eric, and specifically, he was our eldest, he actually called me out and said, "Hey, Dad, you did what you said you would never do. You tried to coach me." And I reflected on it. He was right. I had trying to impose because I was a little frustrated with things he was doing. And so if they come asking for advice, that's fine. But we leave it to them. But we are supportive. We're there. And that I inherited that a bit from my parents. My mother being a competitive ski racer, and my father did hockey up to the university level, but they were just sensible people. And I think that, it's the same notion of, that doesn't mean that you're saying, "Hey, weren't you going to go out for a workout today?" It's
Sure.
a little reminder.
Yeah.
That's not coaching. That's just guidance. That's the friendly advice that you would expect from a parent, as opposed to going out there and saying, "Okay, you got to do this. You got to do this." No, we don't go there. We trust the coaches and the trainers to give them the right advice.
It's funny because it's just natural for parents to want to get in there, and you have to be careful not to micromanage. And I think, for a lot of parents in the financial situation, you find the money, you save the money to get your kids to college or university, you help or trade school or whatever, and check out to make sure they're doing their homework throughout grade school and high school. But at some point, you have to let your babies go out into the world and be themselves. And you have to give them the time and space to make their own mistakes in some instances. But I think that a lot of that is decision-making, and learning about life is one of being able to stand on your own 2 feet and having the courage to do what you think is right, but also learning from things that you do that are not right.
Yeah. So that doesn't mean be disengaged.
Right.
We are very engaged. We are supportive in fundraisers. We've been on boards. I've been very active in the International Ski Federation. I have from time to time been in a situation where I've had to check myself to say, I'm conflicted. There's,
Right.
a rule change coming up, and I can look at it and I can go, well, I can evaluate to say, well, this would actually benefit my child. And I either abstain, or else the mechanism I actually used was I would reference back to the governing body for skiing in Canada, find out what their view was, And almost in every instance, we were in alignment that what I thought, they agreed that they thought. But I would ask the question saying, what is your decision on this rule change or policy change? And I will reflect that, whether I agree with it or not, because that's my role, because I have to take off my parent hat and use my experience hat. But and that's a tough thing to do. But I found I can't even think of an example where we had a difference of opinion when it came to that. And if it became something that was acute, such as team selection and so on, which did come up when I was president of Alpine Canada, then I recused myself.
Okay, so a lot of what I think we could be talking about is high achievement. And one of the things that you are perhaps best known for is that it was the Alpine Ski Association that morphed into something that was part of the entire Olympic movement, which is something called the Own the Podium program. And you were instrumental in getting that not only up and running in the ski program, but also getting it to transition into the wider Olympic movement. And of course, as most of the viewers would know, Canada did indeed own the podium by the Vancouver Games in 2010. We won more gold medals than any other country. And it was a big, hairy, audacious goal that people said we would never achieve. Yet here's Canada owning the podium when we host the Olympics. Could you perhaps share a little bit about the decision-making that went into having that goal? It's a goal that I think a lot of critics would say was audacious and unattainable, and yet you've proven that it can be done, and it was done. Tell me a story about that.
Well, it's Own the Podium was an interesting pathway, and it's timely because Canada is actually right now having some struggling again with it. And I find, and this is perhaps me revealing a little bit of my thoughts, although I am no longer directly involved in any of this, that I think we're missing the point. Leading up to 2010, through the creation of Own the Podium and into 2010, and then for a period of time afterwards, we understood it. And that is that an athlete, and it really was just borrowing what athletes are doing. Kids get involved in sport. You, of course, have the primary goal, which is you want to encourage recreation. You want to encourage fitness. You want to encourage all the fundamentals. But when you get into the high performance side of it, it becomes quite narrow and very targeted. And yes, elite, but very influential. And I'll borrow something that John Furlong, who was the chair of the Vancouver 2010 Olympic Organizing Committee, shared, which, because they actually kickstarted by committing to fund 50% of it, and the other 50% coming from the government of Canada, was he said, as far as running the games, the only people who are going to really care about how the games are run are people in the lower mainland of BC. But every Canadian is going to care how Canada does and across the entire country. And that has not changed. Second thing is Canada is a nation, and we're, as we are finding out right now, we're progressive, but we're middle of the road in terms of decision making and somewhat conservative in our process, but we listen to people. We are diverse. We are a very diverse community and country. And we, I think, have some very positive attitudes towards, the many different facets that affect sport and society. And the notion of winning is one that we do struggle with. But I always draw it back to saying, when we were watching the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup this year, we didn't want them to come second. We wanted them to win the cup. I actually had a conversation with a writer with the Globe and Mail just prior to the 2010 Olympics, where he was questioning the notion of owning the podium. And he actually said, well, that's not really what Canadians want. And I said, well, so you're telling me that an athlete getting in a start gate in Kitzbühel, Austria, has it going through his head saying, I hope I get to the bottom and I do okay? And I went, really, that's what you're thinking? And you're telling me that when we're watching a hockey game that people aren't saying we want to win. And he goes, well, no, that's not quite right. And I said, well, yes, it is. That's exactly what you said, is that winning is not what Canadians want. And it's all of understanding what winning is. Winning is not a winner take all thing. It's got many different facets to it, but it's the notion of Own the Podium was one that was aspirational. We had talked about on the podium or around the podium and all sorts of different things. And we said, no,
we're gonna own it.
That's what we want to do, because we want to convey a message, a clear culture that we are trying to do it properly.
I cannot help but think that there's a parallel between people listening today who want to own the podium with regard to their own retirement. They have a goal, it might be audacious and whatever else, but they're going to do whatever it takes to reach the goal. The thing that always strikes me when I'm talking to someone like you, especially because you're a skier, there's a direct parallel between what you did when you were in your prime, in your core competency, and Steve Podborski and other crazy people, is the trade-off between risk and reward. And you had to make calculated risks and take calculated decisions with an eye to the longer-term goal of being the first person down to the bottom. So what are there any lessons that you can convey? Hopefully they're transferable to finance, but maybe not. But at any rate, to the extent that they are, decision-making with regard to risk and reward, what can you say?
Well, I would say, drawing on my own experiences and I guess trying to frame it with a bit of philosophy, the things that have been helpful for me are, number one, my wife loves finance and I trust her. She loves to get right down and track everything and all the detail and doing spreadsheets and all this and that. And she's passionate about it. And I'm going, okay, well, that's great. And, I'm very fortunate that my partner in life has that desire to really want to organize it all. That's not something that's my forte. I'm up in the skies a bit, 30,000, 60,000 feet up, but we communicate. So two things. One is you need to have a passion for it. And if you can find a partner, or if you yourself are keen on it, that's number one. Number two, communicate. And in this case, it's between the two of us. But additionally, I've had the good fortune. I had a very good mentor in during the time I was with the Canadian ski team. Andy Farvolden was his name. He was with his own accounting firm. And he was a keen skier, and he provided me with enormous amounts of advice, but primarily of take it on. Don't just listen to what we have to say. Take ownership, take responsibility, which guided me through. I'm not an accountant, but I can do the books of my firm. I did not take on an agent. I handled all of my negotiations personally. I mapped out how I wanted to have what my financial future was. But within all of this, I had the mentorship from Andy, which was extremely helpful. And then I listened to experts. We work with two financial groups currently and have for many decades. And they've assisted me enormously because we don't have all the answers. We don't have the time to dig deeply. And we actually live this through our son, Kevin, who is in wealth management. And you see through him that he's going, no, put your resources into the hands of those who are in fact focused on it. Work with them, but trust them. So the due diligence is selecting the right partners and working with them because they are the experts in the field, unless you choose to go in fully, and many people do. But I think for the vast majority of people, they rely on people providing them with good advice. So listen to them.
That's music to my ears, and it's consistent with what I say, as you might imagine. You and I met once upon a time about 25 years ago in one of your many previous lives when you were a journalist working for Money Sense on TV, and we met then. And I didn't really have a sense of what your views were on personal finance before we reconnected prior to this podcast. And so here's what I did. To AI, I asked artificial intelligence, what are Ken's views on? What are Ken Reed's views on investing in finance? And here's what it said. I want to hear from you how accurate AI is, because this is one of those things where I was very curious. So it said that the tool that I use says that your decision making is rooted in meticulous preparation, calculated risk taking, and a vision that extends beyond the immediate. Is that accurate?
Well, AI, right, tends to be a little bit, very kind sometimes, because I've actually used it in writing, and it's a very, very useful tool. Very useful, very helpful in terms of, number one, automatic spell check, but grammar, thorough grammar, but also giving you a little additional ideas. But that aside, I'd say fairly accurate. What it doesn't convey is what I mentioned about I've got a superstar in terms of my wife who helps out enormously with that and provides me with the discipline of thinking long term. I have learned to not be swayed by market reaction, and that's not an easy thing to do. And volatility is there. You try of course, you're trying your best that, when everybody's selling, that you're got that urge to sell. Those disciplines behind help you think of, what's the long-term goal and prevent, put a little bit of a governor on terms of doing short-term knee-jerk reactions.
Okay, so then when you were a skier, you were known for your daring, and you did things that a lot of people thought just had never been done before. I'm curious about whether or not that attitude is something that you would counsel people to do with regard to their investing. Would you encourage people to swing for the fences or something else? And if so, why or why not?
Well, I think in general, the answer would be no. Meticulous planning, the wealthy barber, whatever, that's, for our generation, one of the famous ones is, slow and steady will give you the nest egg. But that being said, when people have opportunity, if you're involved in a venture that you know thoroughly and you have trust in it, then no, by all means, the capacity for risk is an individual thing. Some are willing to take greater risks than others. If I bring it back to the sports analogy, in my view, because a lot of people, and again, I'll start it off by saying the Hahnenkamm, which has now recently gotten back into the news with the win by Jack Crawford this past winter. People say, well, aren't you scared in the start gate? And my answer, and they're flummoxed by this, is they say, well, no, I wasn't. I never was. Because to me, number one this was the greatest ride you could ever imagine. You're on the best, entertainment arcade ride in the world, and they're saying, okay, here you are, go for it. Well, what's perfect for a guy? And but you know the parameters, the safety, the thought that's been put into it. Plus, what a lot of people don't realize is this is a layered approach where you've been training meticulously for years. So what appears to the majority watching as an enormous risk is something that you've prepared your whole life for. So the risk, in my view, was never as anywhere near as great as what people experienced. And the way to win a race was, yes, you are taking risk, but you are taking a calculated risk. In other words, you know what the outcome is going to be if you mess up. And from time to time, you do make a mistake. And yes, I had one significant injury caused by a mistake, and an unfortunate one. It was a bit the conditions. The snow was soft and stuff happens. But that didn't stop me from not wanting to come back and go back to the World Cup. So again, it's the notion of calculated risk, which I think applies anywhere. And the calculated risk being is that if you know what you're doing and you feel that the risk capital that you're willing to invest is one that either you're okay with or you believe in the venture, then by all means, there's no reason why you wouldn't want to invest in something.
Normally, I close by asking my guests to talk about what advice they would give with regard to making better wealth decisions, since that's the name of the podcast. But I'm going to expand it a little bit. I'm going to relax that admonition and ask you to close with whatever advice you can offer with regard to making decisions in general, because you obviously made a career out of making good decisions. What advice would you give with regard to anybody listening for decision making in general?
That's very wide, very tough question.
Leaving it open for you.
I would apply it to, almost anything, because, whether it's financial, personal, children, raising children, dealing in politics, life in general. And, we're people, we interact, you want to learn. I mean, a big part for me is I'd like to learn. Learning is a lifelong thing, and new ideas, new things are coming up every day. And I'm more than happy to say, oh, yep, I either didn't know that, or I've learned something new, or I was mistaken, and thank you for correcting me. I realized that sticking dogmatically to something is not the right route. But that doesn't mean that you have your beliefs and your foundational beliefs, and especially rooted in where your morality resides and so on. But I think I would impart that I would say, think it through. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Look for people that are experts, who can provide advice. Trust them. And you surround yourself with people that are working with you, that enjoy working with you, but that are looking to help you be successful. And you in turn reciprocate that by, number one, saying thank you, but number two, working collaboratively and in a trusting way to ensure that you're meeting your goals, which in turn are helping them meet their goals.
Well, this is now my turn to say thank you. You're a gentleman. I really enjoyed our conversation today, and I want to wish you all the best in the future.
John, thank you. It's a real pleasure and honor to join you. And thanks for reaching out after so many years and reconnecting.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.